General Hospital Spoilers tease that the custody battle between Steve and his ex-wife Sherry is gradually becoming one of the most complex emotional and legal showdowns the media has ever witnessed between a Hollywood couple. What initially seemed like a civil divorce after 23 years of marriage has now spiraled far beyond typical co-parenting disagreements, evolving into a deep psychological and strategic war laden with prolonged emotional damage. This is no longer just about who gets to spend more time with the child. It has become a question of who is the better parent, who is manipulating, who is harboring resentment, and who is truly acting in the child's best interest. For Steve, once seen as a symbol of strength and stability on General Hospital, this battle exposes a different side, the helplessness of a father watching his daughter, Brooklyn, being slowly pulled away from the arms he believes are loving and protective. Sherry has been accused of preventing Steve from seeing his daughter, and her alleged controlling, cold, and hostile behavior towards Steve's new wife, Michelle, has rendered all efforts at cooperative co-parenting impossible. It's not just about visitation limits being violated, now. The entire environment surrounding the child is shaped by tension, heated exchanges, text messages disclosed in court, harsh words, and the disruptive presence of a third party in the parenting equation. The deeper one looks into the publicized legal documents, the clearer it becomes that beneath both parties' calm exteriors lies a smoldering obsession, where every action is suspected of being calculated, and every word is treated as part of a legal strategy rather than an honest emotional truth. Sherry accuses Steve of harassment, while Steve claims she is a mother who won't allow him to be present in his daughter's life. Amid all the allegations, the most haunting aspect is Brooklyn's silence, a child thrust into the center of a war she never chose, yet must bear all its consequences. This is no longer just a civil dispute. It has crossed the boundaries of the courtroom into the private lives of two people who once loved each other and built a home over nearly 3 decades. Now, as every wound is laid bare before the public, as both sides bring forth attorneys, statements, and private evidence, the one thing being forgotten is the child's voice, and the emotional stability a family environment is supposed to offer. The trauma lies not only in the risk of losing a child but in the feeling of having one's parental role quietly, gradually stripped away, through soft boundaries, intentional distance, and silent isolation in what was once a united family. The calculated shifts being made, from filing accusations, adjusting agreements, appearing in the media, and even releasing private messages, make it clear this is no longer about raising a child together in a healthy way. It's a war for control, a contest for dominance in the eyes of the court, the public, and the child herself. Every move, every decision, is now potential legal evidence before a judge. Even minor behaviors can be cited as inappropriate for parenting, turning everything into a distortion, not about fatherhood or motherhood, but a performance, a defense, an attack, all carefully orchestrated by both sides. Though the court recently granted Steve more time with Brooklyn, a small but meaningful step for him, Sherry's reaction shows this battle is far from over. Her objection to the ruling, claiming her daughter's interests aren't protected around her father and his new wife, has turned every custody exchange into a battlefield, instead of being moments of connection. These handovers have become showdowns, between a father trying to prove he is worthy, and a mother fighting to preserve the power she retained after the divorce. As tensions escalate and bottled-up emotions turn into bold actions, this case becomes more than a private matter. It symbolizes the painful collapse of once sacred family values. A message, a refusal, a cold glance, all now carry the label evidence, transforming their private lives into a never-ending psychological war zone. The longer it drags on, the more the fight between Steve and Sherry becomes one of the most tragic and intricate post-divorce sagas in celebrity circles. It drains time, money, and reputation, but above all, it erodes the most sacred things: trust, compassion, and the ability to unite for the sake of a child. What lingers behind it all is not the question of who wins, but whether Brooklyn truly feels safe and loved, when those meant to protect her are using her as a pawn in an endless adult conflict. Steve now faces a very real risk of losing his custody battle, something unimaginable just months ago for those following this tangled story. But with a barrage of counter-allegations from Sherry, and the surfacing of messages and behavior deemed pressuring or controlling, the legal landscape is shifting rapidly. What was once Steve's legal strength, his image as a loving father, a responsible ex-husband, a man striving for stability in his daughter's life, is now being twisted and used against him. The possibility of losing custody looms ever closer, marking not just a legal defeat, but a heavy blow to his role and identity as a father, something Steve had long viewed as integral to who he is. A dramatic shift is underway. Courts are beginning to reassess the entire situation, no longer focused solely on who is right or wrong, but now examining the emotional, psychological, and moral sustainability of each party's actions. This marks a major change in how custody is determined, not just by agreements or time spent, but by the consistency, stability, and low-conflict environment offered to the child. While Steve continues to assert that he acts in Brooklyn's best interests, Sherry's legal maneuvers are prompting the court to reconsider whether his involvement truly ensures a safe, conflict-free environment for the child. This is opening the door to a quiet but powerful legal recalibration of how post-divorce parental roles are perceived. If Steve loses the case, the consequence won't just be losing shared custody. It will be a loss of honor, the ability to witness key moments in his daughter's growth, and a voice in the most important decisions in her life. Without custody, Steve risks being sidelined not just physically, but from choices about her education, healthcare, and future. That leaves him in a passive state, something a devoted father like him may find unbearable over time. From Sherry's perspective, her counter-strategy appears increasingly effective. She doesn't need to prove she's the perfect mother, she only needs to cast enough doubt on Steve's suitability to shake the court's confidence in him. Bit by bit, detail by detail, from a message construed as harassment to her rejection of his new wife, she is assembling a portrait of instability, in which she plays the role of the protective mother shielding her child from negative influence. This is a new, escalating calculation, not just to protect her role as a mother, but to construct a legal framework that excludes Steve from Brooklyn's everyday life. This shift in legal dynamics is not only weakening Steve's position at the negotiation table, it's also mounting psychological pressure on him, a man who once believed justice would be on his side. The realization that custody is slipping away is haunting, not only because of its present-day impact, but because it threatens to dismantle his future relationship with his daughter. Each day that passes without effective legal intervention, each time his reactions are interpreted negatively, chips away at his faith in the system. If this continues, Steve could lose not only custody, but the last remaining thread connecting him to the remnants of a shattered marriage. Port Charles may be a fictional city, but Steve's real-life battle is playing out with all the seriousness and pain that no TV script could ever truly replicate. And without a legal breakthrough soon, what's coming may not just be a verdict, but a lasting emotional scar for a father, a child, and a family that is no longer whole. Steve's official marriage to Michelle Lundstrom marked not only a significant milestone in his personal journey after the breakdown of his marriage to Sherry, but also a turning point that reshaped the entire structure of his relationship with his former family. As Steve and Michelle began building a new life together, they made no secret of their desire to have children, a natural progression for a couple entering into marriage. Yet that seemingly simple wish acted like a spark igniting a powder keg named Sherry, a woman still wrestling with unresolved emotions, unhealed wounds, and a deep fear of being gradually erased from the life of the man she had shared over 2 decades with. For Steve, the desire to have another child wasn't just about love for Michelle, but also an effort to close a chapter filled with conflict and tension with Sherry. He wanted to end the arguments, the tug-of-war, the lawyers, and court hearings. He longed to reclaim his role as a father in an environment free from limitations and bitterness. He believed Michelle, a woman who understands him, who is patient with his past, and willing to walk beside him through anything, was the right person to start over with. In Steve's eyes, having another child wasn't about replacing or erasing the role of his existing children, it was about continuation. But what he didn't anticipate was how that simple intention would be seen by Sherry as a quiet erasure, a declaration that she no longer held any value in his life. That their former family had become nothing more than a memory. For Sherry, the news that Steve was planning to have a child with his new wife cut deeply into her pride. She hadn't just lost a husband, she now felt as though she was being pushed out of the very orbit of the family she had worked so hard to build. She couldn't stop herself from asking painful questions. Would Steve love the new child more than the ones they had together? Would Michelle become the all-powerful mother figure in Brooklyn's eyes? Would the presence of a new child make Brooklyn feel like an outsider in her own father's home? These questions had no clear answers, but they lingered in Sherry's mind, gnawing at her day and night, pushing her into a state of hypervigilance, anxiety, and a blurring of lines between personal grief and legal rights. The emotional tension soon turned into action. Sherry began setting stricter boundaries in their co-parenting arrangement. She refused to call Michelle by name, refused to let Michelle near Brooklyn, and repeatedly challenged court rulings that granted Steve more time with his daughter. To her, every moment Steve spent with Brooklyn in his new home was a quiet competition with another woman, one she saw as having replaced her without having endured the pain she herself had. Sherry's growing obsession became clear. She wasn't just battling Steve for custody, she was fighting to preserve her own value in a narrative from which she felt she'd been too easily written out. Thus, the story of Steve and Michelle ceased to be a private love story. It was pulled into the gravitational field of a past family unwilling to let go, distorted by old wounds, and blocked by a woman unable to accept that the only connection left between her and Steve was now a legal one called co-parenting, no longer love, loyalty, or cherished memories. Sherry herself became trapped between two conflicting emotional forces. On one hand, she longed to free herself from the man who had hurt her. On the other, she couldn't bear the sight of Steve being happy with someone else, without her. The obsession escalated to the point where any small act from Steve, posting a family photo online, or making a cheerful comment about being ready to be a father again, was received by Sherry as a direct blow to her pride. This led to a series of controlling, defensive, and at times retaliatory legal actions, all designed to retain power, presence, and the respect she felt slipping away. Sherry began fiercely opposing any suggestion that Steve bring Brooklyn into the new home. She quietly collected messages, evidence, and began building a countercase to argue that Steve's new environment, with Michelle and potential new children, might endanger the stability of their daughter. And while Steve basked in hope and new beginnings, a quiet storm was brewing behind him, a storm of legal battles, emotional trauma, and struggles over the roles adults would play in a child's life, a child who had no say in any of it. Sherry's newest fear was no longer about mourning a lost marriage, it was a growing dread that one day, Brooklyn would call another woman Mom, while she, the one who had given birth to and raised the child, would fade into a shadow in the memory of a family that once was. This is no longer just the story of Steve, Michelle, and Sherry. It's a reflection of what many fractured families in real life go through, where one person's new beginning becomes another's haunting reminder of what was lost. And where happiness is not just the right to start over, but the courage to face the wreckage left behind. For Steve, what he longs for, a peaceful family, a new child, may ultimately become the starting point of an even longer, harsher battle than any he's faced before. In real life, as Steve struggles with his custody battle, his on-screen character, Jason on General Hospital, isn't spared from the same whirlwind of family disputes and tragedy. Jason, once the embodiment of loyalty, strength, and unconditional protection, is now caught in a chaotic and dangerous custody fight. His goal isn't just to reclaim a place in the life of his estranged son, Danny, it's also to assert control over the fate of an unborn child Sasha is carrying, a child he suspects might be his, conceived under mysterious and emotionally fraught circumstances. Since returning to Port Charles after a long absence, Jason is no longer the man lurking in the shadows to protect others. He's now direct, assertive, even borderline ruthless, in his pursuit of fatherhood, something he feels was unfairly taken from him. With Danny, Jason no longer accepts brief, superficial visits. He refuses to stand by and watch someone else raise his son. He's demanding a voice in Danny's education, his future. Even his living arrangements, further straining his already fragile relationship with Sam. Meanwhile, the truth about Sasha's pregnancy is a ticking time bomb that sends Jason into deep internal conflict. If the baby is indeed his, he faces yet another test of fatherhood in a world full of doubt, where everyone questions whether a man who lived in silence and violence for so long can truly be a parent. But Jason isn't the same. He wants to step forward, take responsibility, and control every aspect from the pregnancy to the baby's upbringing. This overwhelming desire for control suffocates Sasha, leaving her confused and threatened by Jason's unrelenting intensity. This is no longer the Jason who once stayed silent and only acted when provoked. This is a Jason transformed, one who refuses to let others decide the fate of his children. He brings in lawyers, draws boundaries, and demands that Sasha reveal the full truth about the baby's paternity. This pressure crushes Sasha, leaving her reeling as the man she once trusted becomes the greatest threat to her freedom and her right to motherhood. Even Danny is shaken by Jason's change. Having grown up mostly without a father, he's used to the blurry line between protection and absence. Now, with Jason suddenly reappearing to fix everything, Danny feels overwhelmed. He begins to wonder, is his father truly back out of love, or out of guilt? Jason's sudden dominance has everyone on edge. Because every move he makes now seems calculated, all directed toward one long-term goal, to reclaim control over his family, no matter the cost. No one in Port Charles saw this transformation coming. The man who once avoided involving his children in danger is now dragging the legal system into his personal life, confronting even those he once loved most. Not just Sam or Sasha, but powerful outside forces watching his every move. Because they know, when Jason decides to fight for something, he doesn't back down. That's why the new fear he stirs, cold resolve, uncompromising action, has left the whole city unsettled. No one knows whether Jason is acting out of fatherly duty, or because he has nothing left to lose, and is using his children as the last anchor keeping him from disappearing into the darkness forever. Port Charles has never seen this version of Jason before, not silent, not standing behind others, but stepping boldly into the front lines to reclaim everything he believes is rightfully his. But in that journey, will he lose the empathy, the companionship, and the love that once defined who he was? That is the growing fear, not just within Jason, but within everyone who ever felt safe in his arms. And perhaps the most heartbreaking part of all isn't the custody battle, but the fact that Jason may be becoming someone even he no longer recognizes. Jason is quietly carrying out a series of high-stakes missions, operations with ramifications that extend far beyond the criminal underworld of Port Charles, reaching into the hidden power structures operating in the shadows. After a long absence, Jason has returned not only as a man seeking to reclaim his place within his fractured family, but also as a silent soldier, bearing the burden of maintaining order and safety for those he loves. Yet in the process, everything is shifting, from the way Jason acts and thinks, to how he repositions himself within a city that is no longer what it once was. Jason is no longer driven purely by loyalty. He has entered a new phase, one of calculation, strategy, and unprecedented initiative. He is now orchestrating complex operations in the dark, missions that could determine the survival of people who don't even realize they are in danger. Old enemies are resurfacing, power networks are being disrupted, and Jason is forced to become the one who restores the balance. There is no more room for hesitation. He draws up plans, mobilizes resources, and acts decisively. But what makes it all different this time is the motive behind it. Jason isn't acting merely for honor or duty, he's fighting for the safety of those closest to him. Every move he makes is aimed at protecting Sam, Danny, Sasha, and even the unborn child, each one a fragile link in a chain that, if broken, could bring his entire world crashing down. This shift, prioritizing family at the core of his missions, has triggered profound changes in Jason's thinking and behavior. He no longer takes reckless risks, instead, he's more calculated. Discreet, and at times, chillingly cold. Jason understands that to protect his loved ones, he must not let emotion cloud his judgment. He begins constructing a secret security network, placing watchers on anyone connected to him, covertly installing surveillance devices in vulnerable locations. These aren't impulsive acts, but deliberate components of a larger system, a security strategy Jason is building with the precision of a life-or-death battlefield map. This transformation is reflected not only in Jason's actions, but in his very being. He is no longer the man who operated silently on the sidelines, stepping in only when summoned. He is now the central figure in a network of covert actions reshaping the future of Port Charles, a figure both allies and enemies are learning to fear. Even Jason himself is aware of the changes. In rare moments of solitude, he begins to question whether the surveillance, control, and cold calculations still align with the man he used to be. But every time he sees Danny, sees Sasha carrying their unborn child, or simply remembers the pain of loss, he knows, if he doesn't control his environment, he risks losing everything. This internal shift, from reactive to proactive, from protector to strategist, marks a whole new chapter in Jason's journey. He no longer waits for enemies to strike, he strikes first. He doesn't just guard the rear lines anymore, he penetrates the heart of conspiracies. And in doing so, this change isn't just necessary, it's inevitable. Because if Jason were to operate the way he once did, with trust, emotion, and the occasional mercy, in today's world, he would be the first to fall. Yet this evolution comes with an undeniable cost. Those around Jason are beginning to notice he's no longer the same. Sam feels the emotional distance widening. Danny senses his father's protection like an invisible cage. Sasha, while pregnant, begins to fear that the father of her child is becoming a man who can no longer feel or share emotionally. Despite Jason's intentions being rooted in love and protection, his methods are building an invisible wall, one that gradually isolates him from the very people he's trying to shield. The story of Jason's missions, executed in the name of family safety, is thus more than a tale of a hero returning to the front lines. It's the deeply human struggle of a man trying to balance reason and emotion, duty and compassion, mission and kinship. And within that internal conflict, Jason reveals an unsettling truth. Sometimes, in order to protect the ones we love the most, we must lose parts of ourselves. But is the price of absolute control too high in exchange for such fragile peace? And if Jason ever wanted to return, to the man he once was, would there still be a path back? Because everything he's doing now seems to prove one thing. The Jason Morgan of the past may be gone for good. That, in the end, is the deepest shock, not found in his actions, but in the quiet, irreversible transformation of a man once seen as the embodiment of loyalty and moral integrity.